And this one is about Noam Chomsky. Now, he had an interview recently, and this was a podcast I was not familiar with, but I'm familiar with them now. It's called TheAnalysis.news. And they're talking to Noam Chomsky here about this conflict with China and Taiwan, and also more specifically, the comments that Joe Biden made during that 60 Minutes interview about whether or not the U.S. would intervene. And I want you to hear something that that Noam Chomsky says here that I feel is really important, that we need to pay close attention to in reference to the United States government. So let's go ahead and get to that.
What should Chinese President Xi know about your commitment to Taiwan?
We agree with what we signed on to a long time ago, and that there's a one China policy, that Taiwan makes their own judgments about their independence. We are not we're not encouraging their being independent. That's their decision.
But would U.S. forces defend the island?
Yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack.
To be clear, sir, U.S. forces, U.S. men and women, would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion?
Yes.
Analysts in the U.S. and elsewhere, including Chinese, are saying this sounds like the end of strategic ambiguity over Taiwan. And it also seems that, once again, the White House has tried to walk it back a little bit, claiming the one China policy is still in effect. But how there's a one China policy and a commitment to use American soldiers to defend Taiwan seems to at least escape me. Now joining me again is Noam Chomsky and Daniel Ellsberg. Thanks very much for joining me. So Noam, why don't you start with this? What is going on with Biden doing this? And are they really serious about dropping strategic ambiguity? And maybe you can just explain a little bit what that is for people that don't know.
What's held for about 50 years, keeping peace in a very volatile area. We should recognize that under international law, Taiwan is part of China. It's not ambiguous.
Let's talk about that, for example, for just a second, because that is something that some people don't realize that. And I know we talk about that often, like you hear it more so here on independent media, but even when talking to people that I'm friends with, colleagues of mine, we're not aware of that. So it's not like Taiwan is this separate entity. It's not. It is a part of China. So just keep that in mind when you listen to some of the talking points that have come from Joe Biden from that 60 Minutes interview, when you hear some of the talking points that have come from some of the other politicians actually in reference to this conflict. And quite honestly, when you hear some of the talking points that are coming from people like Sagar and Jetty and Marshall Kozlov from Breaking Points in reference to this conflict, just keep in mind that Taiwan is a part of China. It is not separate. So thank you, Noam, for shouting that out.
It's like Hawaii being part of the United States. That's and the United States has accepted about 50 years ago the one China policy. Says Taiwan is part of China, but we'll keep ambiguous about what's going to happen in the interaction between Taiwan and China and the United States. So both sides won't do anything to disrupt it. We just won't talk about it. We won't be provocative. We won't try to disrupt it. And let's just keep the peace in a very volatile area. It's worked for 50 years. That's pretty good. Now the United States is trying to provoke it, undermine it. Biden's speech is just one example.
Aha. Did you hear what he just said? He said something there that I'm proud of him for saying this and admitting this. He said the United States is trying to provoke it. Not that China's trying to provoke it. The United States is trying to provoke it. Sometimes I wonder, I go back to that interview again and I wonder, that comment that Joe Biden made, was that a misunderstanding? Was that a slip of the tongue? Or was that on purpose to show that they're trying to provoke something? Was that on purpose to send a message to China? Sometimes I wonder. But once again, you have someone else besides me, besides those of us at RBN, pointing out that the United States is the one who is being the aggressor. We're the ones who are provoking it, not China right now and not Taiwan. So that is important to note. So thank you so much, Noam. See, I like it when Noam Chomsky does it this way. I like it when Noam's back good now. He was, I was questioning him last year a little bit on some of his takes, but I'm glad that he brought it back home to that, because that is important for people to know. I want you to remember that, because if something does end up happening between China and Taiwan, I want you to go right back to this video with Noam Chomsky to remind yourself that the United States is the one who is provoking it. Just remember that.
In some ways, I think even more important is what just happened in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
And you need to ask yourself, ladies and gentlemen, we need to start asking, where is all this money coming from? U.S. Senate panel approved $6.5 billion to fund weapons for Taiwan, but they won't give you money for health care. We can't give everyone health care in this country, but look at all the billions that have been going out the door to Ukraine, and now they're going to be sending money to Taiwan. They have the money. It's just not for us. I'm going to start keeping a spreadsheet of this, of all of the dollars that's going out the door from the U.S. Senate. And we're going to come to a total by the end of this year. And we're going to see how that money could have been used in other ways for people here in this country.
Where they just came out with a bill, proposed legislation, which pretty much says that Taiwan should be a kind of like a NATO partner. Stop the ban, put down all the bars. Regular diplomatic relations, interoperability of weapons. In fact, it reads very much like, it's almost a copy of the inflammatory rhetoric that led up to the Russian invasion last.
Oh, imagine that. Similar rhetoric. Different countries, but similar rhetoric. Again, the United States government is the one who's provoking it.
Full with, increasing, establishing an enhanced program, was the word that was used, for Ukraine to enter into NATO, increasing weapon supply, military operations. It's not a justification for the invasion, but they were plainly being very provocative. In fact, the United States Department even said, we're not going to take Russian security interests into account. Well, now they seem to be doing the same thing with China.
That's right. You see that? I had to put the captions on for this one, you guys. Sorry, because sometimes it can be hard to hear, what he's saying. But now they appear to be doing the same thing with China.
You should read that policy, the Taiwan Policy Act. It's basically telling China that we want to not only break down strategic ambiguity, but we want to be highly provocative about it. Now, Biden, to his credit, seems to oppose that legislation. I haven't seen anything definite, but he's indicated he's not approving it. But it passed overwhelmingly bipartisan support. It's going to go to Congress and see what happens. But it's kind of after the Pelosi visit was crazy enough, but this goes beyond. It's almost as if you're watching this from outside. It almost looks as if Congress is dying to have two wars on its hands.
And I believe that they are. I believe that they are. let's look at ways that the U.S. government has provoked this. Let's see, Nancy Pelosi, that trip that she made to Taiwan. I believe Ed Markey too. I have to double check, but I could have sworn I read that he was going over there too. Of course, Nancy Pelosi's got more attention, obviously. So there's that. Again, that's provoking. That's provoking it. There's the statement that Joe Biden made on that 60 Minutes interview that said the U.S. government would intervene. And they had to talk to the White House, like press, and the White House confirmed that, no, we are not trying to have the U.S. intervene. And they asked Joe Biden that question twice. They asked him that question twice, and he confirmed it. And then now other people like Ro Khanna and the rest of them are trying to jump in and say, well, actually what Joe Biden really meant was this. No. So those are two examples that I just gave you in ways that they are provoking it. And then now them having the Senate pass legislation to send over $6 billion worth of weapons to Taiwan. They are provoking it in the similar way that I would say they did with this conflict with Russia and Ukraine. If you look at a lot of the conflicts that we've seen, at least in my generation, somewhere along the way, the United States government had their hand in it in some way, shape, or form. But for some reason, we come out looking like the good guys to a lot of Americans. I think a lot of people are just fooled. They're not really following what's going on.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think I read, and I'll have to look it up, that Congress had been proposed, I don't know if it's been passed, for aid to Taiwan, billions of dollars that would be used to buy weapons in the U.S. and elsewhere. Is that part of that same bill you're talking about, Noam, or is it something separate, or am I mistaken?
No, this is separate. This is a new, it's not legislation yet. It came out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Anyway, one of the
four negative votes, one Republican and a couple of Democrats. So it goes.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. One of the very few reasons I can think of for this very provocative behavior, undermining our supposed commitment to a one China policy, which Biden and everybody else have always announced and are still announcing. But there, in other words, that Taiwan is a province of China, which the Chinese certainly regarded as being, not just Xi and all of his previous leaders. In fact, their nationalist feelings have focused for a long time, I understand, on the eventually being strong enough and taken seriously enough to regain control of Taiwan. In other words, that's a red line that we are rushing right toward to cross, not only by Biden and not only by these congressional bills, but the visits by Congress leaders treating Taiwan as a sovereign state, in effect, which is totally contradictory to the one China policy. Now, why would China particularly be concerned about that, aside from the fact that it's a nationalistic mantra that Taiwan is not an independent state of China, something that Taiwan agreed with almost unanimously until this century, till the last 20 years.
Right. So they were in agreement with this before. It's not like China just made this decision on their own. Like Taiwan did agree to that before, until like he said, the last 20 years. So I just want to put that out there as well. I don't want people to think that China just said, look, this is how it's going to be and this is how it is. They did agree to this. So here we go. This mouse is about to drive me crazy tonight, guys. Okay.
Now, the best reason I can think of, one of the few effective reasons, is to sell more arms to Taiwan, and we have yet done. The 1979 agreement with China, recognizing mainland China as the sole ruler of all China, including Taiwan, did, by simultaneous congressional action, allow for us to sell defensive weapons to Taiwan under a certain ceiling, and we pretty much observed that. I think we can be sure that Raytheon and Lockheed and Grumman, Northrop Grumman, the others, would like to break through that, just as they are doing marvelously in Europe now and Ukraine directly. They would like to be able to sell weapons the same way they do to other NATO countries. But beyond that, also, before 1979, Taiwan was in effect a U.S. military protectorate since 1949, when the communists took power in the mainland. The Seventh Fleet was used to prevent any continuation of the Civil War, which had up to that point had led to the victory of the Chinese Communist leadership. The Seventh Fleet was there to protect them with threat of nuclear weapons, as I revealed last year with some top secret documents that are still being kept top secret, on the fact that we were threatening and prepared to use nuclear weapons to defend Taiwan and possibly even the offshore islands, which are within sight a few miles off the Chinese mainland. So that ended in 79. Up till that time, we had bases on Taiwan, which you can be sure the Navy and Air Force were very happy to have.
Of course, the United States had bases there. The United States has bases all over the world. Isn't it crazy how we occupy so much of the world?
And I'm sure we'd be glad to get back. We had, I'm virtually sure, I believe, nuclear weapons there. I visited there in 1960 for the Defense Department, and there were nuclear weapons there at that time. They would like to get those back. Well, it's very obvious. China has, in this case, not just nationalistic, but significant security reasons for not wanting that to happen. And strictly speaking, they don't even have to be in NATO to do that, nor would Ukraine have had to be in NATO for U.S. bases to be there. There could be, for other European powers, there could be bilateral arrangements then and now, which would allow for that. And obviously, Russia was very reasonably concerned not to let that happen. And actually, I believe there was word that Biden was definitely prepared to negotiate on that point, on basing and weapons. In any case, in Taiwan, the Chinese, I think it's a recipe. As Noam has said, it's hard to understand that as other than a desire to bring about a war between China and the U.S., given the Chinese repeated vociferous position for the last 70 years that they will not allow again.
So I want to just cut in here for just a second, because I want to ask you this question. Why would the U.S. government want to possibly have some type of a conflict with China? Well, there's a couple things that you can point to, and that's their economy, for example. They may not like the fact that China is rising as like this sort of superpower per se. The fact that China economically, they don't really need the United States the way that we need them, especially when you think about the supply chain, because how many products in this country are made in China? I can't go to probably one store, unless it's a mom and pop store, and even then it's questionable, where I don't see a product that says made in China, right? So is that China's fault? No, I think that's actually our government's fault, because it was under people like Bill Clinton where they sent those jobs overseas. They sent those jobs to countries like China. Now the United States government is going to try to, I guess, basically inflict some type of pain and suffering on China because they were able to thrive, because they were smart and said, oh yeah, go ahead. You want to bring your goods, your jobs over here? Go right ahead. Yeah, we can make these products for you. But what was not supposed to happen, according to people like Bill Clinton, it was not supposed to get to the point where China was supposed to be a serious competitor for the United States. And it is. And they see that as a problem. How dare another country try to thrive and grow? Only we're supposed to do that, right? I'm being sarcastic, of course. So it's a problem that they see, oh God, what if China surpasses the United States? We can't let them be a wealthy country. We can't let them have these kind of things. Only we're supposed to have that. And I showed you in the clip that you saw from Ro Khanna last night, even Ro Khanna himself let that slip. That's why they would push for something like that. Any country that is doing well on its own, that the U.S. may see as a threat to them economically, they are going to try to take down. They want to police the world. They want to be in control. They always want to be number one. They always want to be on top. I don't believe in U.S. intervention in other countries. I don't believe in it. I don't support it. I don't support war. I don't support imperialism. When other countries have a conflict, I believe that they should be allowed to handle it on their own. I never supported the United States government going into these countries and trying to overthrow leaders, trying to tell them how they should run their country. How well did that work out for people in Afghanistan? I never agreed with it. Imagine if it was done to us. I don't see any countries coming over to the United States and trying to overthrow our leaders and telling us how we should behave in this country and telling us what we can buy, what we can produce. We do that. That's the problem. So I have to keep putting this message out here because I keep seeing a lot of fear mongering, even in independent media, by the way, about China. Oh, we should be concerned. We got to look out for them. Look at what they're doing economically. Yeah, so what? So what? It's not their fault that we decided to stop making goods in the United States. Is it China's fault that Ford decided to ship their parts, have their parts made overseas because they were cheaper and laid off all those people at the Ford plants and factories? Is it China's fault? Is it China's fault that a lot of these other factories in the United States that actually gave people good jobs decided it would be cheaper to get parts from Mexico and China and Canada? Is that China's fault? No, that was the United States' fault. That was a part of greed. That was a part of capitalism. China was smart and engaged with the opportunity. China was smart and said, you know what? We're still going to make some things in our country. We're not going to be like the United States and send everything overseas. Imagine that. So that's not China's fault. Let's go back in for a little bit more.
Foreign bases, U.S. bases, threatening them from Taiwan and preventing them from peaceful reunification in Taiwan. What do they actually want, which is hard to believe, an actual war? They are certainly risking it. For whatever reasons, they are gambling here on such a war. And one thing that Biden is not, and I'm afraid not going to remove in terms of ambiguity, is whether he will use nuclear weapons if necessary to defend Taiwan. Is he going to say, to remove that ambiguity and to say, no first use, we will not initiate the stages of blowing up the world to defend Taiwan or anywhere else, or the Ukraine? By the way, he could easily afford to say that in Ukraine, no first use by the US, and to try to shame Russia from the threats that Putin is actually making now in imitation of the threats we made for so many years.
Now, I want to get to the part here. I forgot how long that guy spoke. Sorry about that. The other part here that Noam Chomsky addresses here.
Any of them, I'm sure they'd be very eager to maintain their commercial relations with China. For the corporate sector, it's just been a bonanza. They get cheap, controlled labor, much less lower skilled, healthy, and they make enormous profits. It's not just the military, the whole corporate sector. For them, the opening of China has been a huge bonanza. And
so why are they not confronting this approach and opposing it effectively? What's happening?
that's what I would be interested in seeing, what's going on in the corporate boardrooms. It's beyond that. In fact, Taiwan is the major producer of advanced chips. The only ones who compete are South Korea.
There you go.
I think the corporations are concerned about the threat to supply lines, which was brought up by COVID. The pandemic, showed that the business model of the past generation has been very hazardous. It's a kind of a, business model of sort of like, it's kind of like running an assembly line so that it just lasts to the last second. Nothing can go wrong. If anything goes wrong, it collapses. That's been the business model on supply chains. As soon as anything goes wrong, it all collapses. Very fragile system. Now, the corporate world must be realizing this. This had nothing to do with Taiwan. It was the pandemic that did it. And so they must be trying to rationalize supply chains, which might mean trying to move things to other less dangerous areas.
But isn't that threatened by a congressional delegation?
Yeah.
Okay, and we're going to stop right about there. But again, if you want to see the full video, it is a longer interview. It's about 43 minutes. The name of that video is called "Why is Biden Risking Nuclear War with China?" And that is Noam Chomsky and Daniel Ellsberg. And that is on the Analysis News channel. So definitely check that out if you want to see the full interview. But yeah, I mean, there's another issue that he brought up there, which is in reference to supply chain. I think he's right about that as well. I mean, some of this could have been prevented in reference to the U.S. Look, the U.S. economy is not what it used to be. It is not what it used to be. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that was made was the decision, all these companies that decided, we're not going to make parts. We're not going to make our products here in the United States. We're going to have those parts made overseas because it's cheaper. And now we can lay off some of these employees that we have, and then we make more money for us. And by we, I mean the CEOs, the people who own the companies. I think that is one of the worst things that happened in reference to the economy in this country. That was a huge mistake. Huge. Very sad. Imagine what the Rust Belt would be like today if that never happened. I'm going to go to some of the comments. Bill Bradley, in most nations, the education system is largely an indoctrination camp where those nations present an edited version of history in which they are either the hero or the victim. The school curriculum is a joke. Thank you for the super sticker, JM. And Hector says, when your main export is weapons, you are going to find a way to create war. Bingo. Bingo. Well said.